So we finally have chapter 16 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex in full, and it pretty much reveals the backstory behind Boruto's Flyin Thunder God and how it actually functions. There's also Sumeri's love confession for Boruto that causes some tension between her and Sarada, so the fandom wars are going crazy on Twitter at this moment. And there's also the Shinju showing up in the Sand Village to face off against Team 7. So we have a lot to discuss, but of course we're gonna start from the top. Now the person on the cover for this month is Ada, and the title of the chapter is Singularity of Fate, which ties into something very interesting, but we're going to discuss that later on in the video. Now the first panel shows a younger Boruto having a conversation with Kashin Koji. He then goes on to explain to Boruto that space-time ninjutsu instantly transfers any object regardless of self or others to any location. Like the ability to fly, it's one of the basic abilities possessed by the Otsutsuki. Now I did mention this in the spoiler video as well, and I had some comments kind of confused about what he's referring to here. So I just want to clarify that he's referring to the space-time vortex that the Otsutsukis use to travel to different dimensions. So Boruto has used this ability on multiple occasions. The first time was when Kawaki triggered it for him to get to Jigen's dimension to save Naruto. And the second time was again Kawaki goading Boruto into using it to escape Ishiki's dimension. So Boruto has never used this ability on his own accord before, which is why Kashin Koji goes on to say that it is something that is not yet under his control. Now it then goes on to say, but you, after 6 years into the future, succeed in controlling this power. He then goes on to say that by assigning your chakra to ninja tools and by sensing this, you can instantly go to any location. The ability has been sublimated into a ninjutsu that allows free and unrestrained movements. Now this part is very interesting. I also mentioned it in spoiler as well. This kinda implies that this ability wasn't a ninjutsu before, which means that the space-time vortex itself is a shinjutsu ability of the Otsutsuki. And this kinda gets into the weeds of if every Otsutsuki ability that's innate to the Otsutsuki is a shinjutsu or not. So this would be whether the rods, maybe the ability to fly, or even the ability to suppress one's chakra. All of that could just be shinjutsu abilities that the Otsutsuki innately possess, but of course we just have to wait and see. Now it then goes on to confirm that he's referring to Flyin Thunder God, and of course that Boruto's grandfather Minato Namikaze specialized in the same jutsu that had a similar name. But he also then goes on to say that in fact it's actually a different technique. You don't know the real Flyin Thunder God jutsu. While searching for the control method of space-time ninjutsu in the ninja world, you achieve nearly the same result for creating the variant of the Flyin Thunder God jutsu. So in a sense, Boruto, while trying to learn how to control his space-time ninjutsu ability, which is the space-time vortex, accidentally created this variant of Flyin Thunder God, which he then goes on to name Flyin Thunder God, but it isn't actually Flyin Thunder God, which kinda also implies that FTG is an offshoot of the space-time vortex, even though they kinda work differently on the mechanic level, which is that FTG requires you to have a pre-made marking, while the vortex does not. With that said, we then get a panel of Boruto training to use FTG, and he's pretty much teleporting to different shurikens. Koji then goes on to say that the most suitable medium for the granting of chakra is a ninja tool. After much trial and error, this will be the most optimal solution you arrive at. Boruto then questioned him about whether his katana would also work, and Koji said that kunai or shuriken, any kind of ninja tool, will serve as a medium for teleportation. If it's in visible range, teleportation will become more accurate and easier, which kind of explains why Boruto took so long to teleport to the Ten Tails dimension in chapter 4. Now Boruto also supports this conclusion when he said that it essentially means it's difficult to teleport far. And Koji replied saying that, for example, the shuriken that has been granted as a medium, let's assume that it was located far to the north and south at the same time. So, as shown in the panel, two separate shurikens, north and south. He then says that you can sense the chakra of the medium you want to meet and attempt to teleport to. However, in this case, whether north or south, I can't tell which shuriken you will teleport to. So it's pretty much saying that Boruto can't decide between two shurikens because it's the same item. So Boruto can try to visualize it if he wants to, but he doesn't have control over which one he teleports to. Now Boruto then says, indeed, that might be difficult. And Kashin Koji replied saying that if the medium is always only one, there's no problem. But that also means that you can't fully utilize the convenient nature of this technique. Then you thought about shapes to get ideas. Objects with various shapes are used as mediums. The symbol represents figures that can be imagined. This allows teleportation to the intended coordinates even over great distances. Boruto then says, I see. In short, it's dedicated to fly farther. So if we prepare objects with various shapes, it will be fine. Koji then says, that's right. However, when it comes to teleportation to a distance, it requires even more concentration. The farther away it is, the more difficult it gets. This is going to take some serious training. So again, this goes back to Boruto needing some time to concentrate to get to the 10 Tails dimension because it's very far away. Now, Koji then tells Boruto that in the future you will build this theory and knowledge over the coming years, but the current you has obtained it in just a few minutes. After all, knowledge is just knowledge. Until you truly master the Flyin Thunder God, don't forget that extraordinary training is essential. Boruto then says, don't worry, let's keep going, we have to do it. Now then seems like we skipped to later on that day because they're now inside Orochimaru's hideout, and we have Boruto saying, what the hell? If a good future and a bad future can be seen, it will be better to inform everyone and get their cooperation. Of course, things will be done in a more positive direction, right? Koji then says it's ironically frustrating, but the more people know, the more they understand. So the future will change dramatically. He then goes on to explain what he means by this by saying that I knew it, therefore now I no longer behave as if I didn't know before. As a result, the future branches out complexly. Predictions become exceedingly difficult under such circumstances. The very advantage of predicting here and everywhere has become so. It's meaningless. He then goes on to say, listen, knowing the future for better or worse is nothing but an act of drawing the future. The more we know about the future, or the more one knows about the future, that person deviates greatly from the real called destiny. A heretical existence that destabilizes the future. It becomes a singularity. To advance, we must aim for the future. It is better that everyone doesn't know the future. Our duty as the singularity of destiny is to support the journey towards a good future from behind the scenes. And because Koji said our duty, Boruto asked him, me too? And Koji said, you're like me already, a singularity. And of course Boruto is kinda shocked by this, but he then goes on to say, and then, sooner or later you must be seeing our information, Ada. And this switches to Ada actually watching their conversation in real time, which implies that Koji knew from the past that Ada would be watching the conversation at this specific moment in time, this exact second, so that Ada would hear him say this, which is pretty broken. Okay, that's pretty cool. But what's even cooler, which is the best part of this chapter, which has my mind just like going crazy, is the singularity of fate. And this is simply just a pivotal moment or event where the typical flow of destiny is disrupted, altered, or concentrated. It's a point where all possible outcomes, which as you guys know this refers back to prescience, converges into one inevitable event which could change the course of someone's life or the fate of the entire world. This of course goes back to Boruto atop the Akage monument saying that this is the only possible outcome, or asking that if it was the only possible outcome, which implies that the event is a fixed point in time, which means that it's a singularity. Now of course this might seem a bit contradictory because Koji did see futures in which Kawaki was devoured by the Ten Tails and none of this happened. But one thing to keep in mind is that singularities can be created at later points in time, which means that certain events have to take place before all paths lead in that direction. So Kashin Koji needs to ensure that everything happens in a certain manner, which would ensure that all paths lead to Kawaki fighting Boruto atop the Akage monument. Now Koji also refers to singularities as individual entities such as him and Boruto, and that's because they have the ability to draw the future by knowing the future. So if Boruto goes on to tell everyone about the future, they will also have the ability to change the future, which means that you'll have too many cooks in the kitchen and he can't dictate where the future goes, which is why it tells Boruto not to tell anyone about the future. Now of course Ada now knows about the future because she has the Senringan, but I assume Koji has a plan for Ada because he knew that she would know that information, so we'll see how that one plays out. Now we then skip over to Sarada asking Ada what did she find, and Ada replied saying that the reason why Boruto doesn't want to talk much is I guess he had his own reasons after all, so that no unnecessary harm will come to you. I think he deliberately makes an effort to do so. Sarada then goes on to say that it might be true, but Boruto is carrying it all by himself. It's Konoha, which is of course referring to the village. Even though it's clear that we're all dealing with a common enemy, he's refusing to stop. At the very least, I want to be of help. She then says, Ada, where's Boruto now? And that's when Sumire chips in, and the chips may fall where they may. So Sumire goes on to say, I think he doesn't want to be known. Maybe Boruto is, and Sarada kinda cuts in and says, what? And Sumire goes on to say, we're openly supporting Boruto, but we don't have much information about him. She then says that's why they shouldn't be chasing Boruto. Then Sarada jumps in saying, but you saw it too, Sumire. He might have died if things went poorly. Going against the Shinju alone is just too reckless. Sumire then pops in saying, what if you think about it a little? Boruto's feelings. And Sarada is kinda shocked. She's like, huh? Sumire then goes on to say, do you think he does it willingly? There are some things you want to talk about but can't. Have you even thought about it? And Sarada is, of course, still shocked. She doesn't know what's happening. Sumire then kinda bows her head and she's kinda sweaty, she's kinda nervous, typical Sumire. And she says, not just Boruto, but my feelings too. So we're kinda getting into what this is actually about. And she goes on to say, you know that right? I like Boruto. And yet you were the first one to jump in and say it. And we also have a different translation that says, you were the first one to hug him. Either one could work depending on interpretation. She could just be saying that you were the first one to say it because you jumped and hugged him before I did, which could give that implication. So I understand what she's saying. But again, they are childhood friends, so that doesn't have to be the implication. But of course, these are teenagers, so give them some, leeway here. Now she then goes on to say that I think I understand how you feel in that situation. It's no longer you turned out like that, which means she does understand why Sarada would hug Boruto after not seeing him for 3 years. But she then goes on to say, what about me? Back then, right in front of me, did even care about my feelings, just a little bit. And of course, Sarada doesn't say a damn thing, she just continues to look at Sumire, and this prompts Ada to say to herself that the atmosphere is so bad, it's way too awkward, can't move an inch, but at the same time, the situation is so tense, I can't stop it. Sumire then goes on to say, I'm sorry, why? Why is it like this? In this kind of situation, it shouldn't be like this. She then gets up and runs away, and Sarada tries to stop her saying, wait, class rep. And Sumire replied saying, for how long are you going to keep calling me that, class rep? And then she just leaves. Now, of course, this once again I think goes back to Boruto as well, calling Sumire class rep in chapter 6, which could give the feeling that they're not close enough to be on a first name basis, but at the same time I don't think that's the case, because even Sarada, who is close friends with Sumire, refers to her as class rep. I don't think it's the case that they don't see her as a close friend. It's kind of like you get into the habit of calling someone something, and it doesn't change even when the relationship itself changes. Now, of course, these are teenagers, overly emotional, so you can misinterpret things, and I think that's what's happening here. Or it could be the case that I'm wrong, it could be the case that they don't see her as close enough to be on a first name basis, and that's why they still call her class rep. I highly doubt that's the case, but of course, we'll see. Now we then skip over to the daimyo having a conversation with the village elders. He then asks them what's going on. He must have made contact several times already. Honestly, letting someone escape after capturing them once, even so just a rogue ninja or two, why can't they be dealt with? The elders then says sincerely there is no excuse to justify this, and daimyo then says quickly catch him and put an end to his life. If you can't do that, then the appropriate person will need to take responsibility. The elder then replied saying, please rest assured, I will definitely act in accordance with your wishes. I will ensure this matter is resolved. So it seems like Shikamaru is in deep trouble, although I don't know how they're going to rest assured that this matter is handled, because they can't handle Boruto, okay? So, that's one thing. Second thing is, I don't know how they're gonna handle Shikamaru. Maybe they demote him, maybe they lock him up, maybe he actually gets punished somehow. It's actually crazy that these guys have so much power, despite the fact they don't actually have the power, because the Elite Village can handle anyone who tries to mess with them. They're like the superpower of the entire planet. But there's also the fact that they need money to run the village, they need to have a stable economy, they need to have trades and all that lovely stuff, which requires more than just, oh, I'm just stronger than you. You need to build relations with lords and all that stuff. So if they don't want to be a dictatorship on the planet itself, they need to act in accordance with the law. So if they do require that Shikamaru steps down, he will have to do it. Now there's also the case that this kind of seems that this is where the Kawaki stuff comes from, where he tries to destroy the shinobi system. I feel like these lords will do something crazy that leads Kawaki down that path. I don't know what they're gonna do that can do that, but this seems to be the seeds being sown here. So we'll see how this one plays out. Now then skip over to Shikamaru meeting Ada atop the balcony, and he says, as for me, I'd rather avoid meeting and talking face to face. My mind slows down when I look at you. Now she then goes on to say, well, you don't want to be heard by the sensory team, but when you're out of sorts like that, it's cute and I like it. He then says, so what's the situation in the sand? She then goes on to say, unfortunately, as you expected, a new Shinju is being born. His name is Ryu. Its origin lies with the child from the sand. Shikamaru then says, Shinki, huh? And she replied saying that his target is the Kazekage. For now he's sealed and he's in a safe state. But Ryu can undo the seal, probably because it was his own technique. Shikamaru then goes on to say that if we don't take them down, Gaara will be in trouble. I'll arrange a mission to the sand immediately. Ada then says, by the way, I saw footage a few hours ago. There are some troublesome ones among them. One of them was able to see when I used the Senringan. He was peering at me. She then goes on to say that her blood ran cold when it happened, so I should forgive her for not wanting to watch them in real time. She feels so bad. Shikamaru then says, got it. You don't have to push yourself. I don't mind if it's a log from the past. She then goes on to say, this is about Boruto, but you stopped trying to kill him, didn't you? You used Mitsuki to let Boruto get away. And Shikamaru tries to deny this for some reason, like Ada doesn't have the Senringan to just go check. And she pretty much calls him out saying, feigning ignorance, I see. Don't worry, I won't snitch to the rest of the village. It would be inconvenient for me if your position was compromised. That and more than anything, I don't want to cause any more trouble for Boruto. Shikamaru then gives her this look and she then says, don't mind me, I'm just talking to myself. She then says Kawaki also agreed to cooperate with Boruto for the time being. At the very least, if you want to to do something about the humanoid Shinju, it's better that you don't get in their way. Shikamaru then says, Ada, Boruto has a secret collaborator, did you see him? Last time he talked to me in the form of a toad. I remember seeing that frog somewhere before. It's Kashin Koji, isn't it? That's when you see one of Koji's frog pop out from Ada's clothing and says, good guess Shikamaru, it's just as you say. I'll only tell you the gist of it, no questions, understand? Konohamaru, Sarada, and Mitsuki dispatch only those three to the Land of Wind. Ryu or maybe Matsuri will show up there. It could potentially be both of them, but your team will work together with two shinobi from the sand. Shikamaru then says, hold on, what do you mean? I want a good reason. Tell me why we should go along with this. Koji then says, I told you, you can't ask questions. If they say they won't go along with it, then you give them a plausible reason yourself. One more thing, don't let Uzumaki Himawari leave the village. She's been targeted by Jura. If you let her outside the village, she's guaranteed to run into him. If that happens, she'll die. Fortunately, Jura judged Konoha's culture to be something of high value. He's reluctant to battle inside the village. As long as nothing catastrophic happens, Konoha is safe for the time being. Supposing if hereafter Jura were to visit a bookstore, they should be notified that they should treat him as if he was their #1 customer. Shikamaru then asked him if he was serious, and Koji replied saying that this guy isn't a joke. Listen, the most important thing is not to attack him. If he were to get serious, our chances of winning wouldn't even be 1 in a million. So, do not intervene with Jura. We'll take out his allies with the smallest force possible. If Jura shows up, flee immediately. That is all from me. Good luck. He then says about your help with Boruto's escape, although belatedly, I am grateful. Despite there being no guarantees, you went against the rules and your fellow countrymen, and you followed your own heart, for the sake of what you believe to be right. I will not force you to do anything. For the sake of the future, continue to follow your heart. And then the toad pretty much leaves. Now Shikamaru then says, my, what a pain, and starts to smoke. And we then get this panel of Ada thinking about what Koji said about following your heart. So this might lead to Ada falling for Boruto instead of Kawaki, but it could also be the case that it's just her finding her own path, you know, so we'll see how that plays out. Now we also got 2 panels of Sumire being sad, which is quite sad because Sumire being sad makes me sad. So yeah, everything is just sad. We then skip over to Sarada, Mitsuki, and Konohamaru entering the Land of Wind, which is of course where the Sand Village is located. Mitsuki then asks Sarada what's wrong. She says nothing to worry about, it's alright, I'm fine. So it seems like she's kinda worried about the conversation with Sumire, which someone did mention on Twitter, which I was like, is that gonna be the case? But apparently it is. She's worried about Sumire. And Konohamaru then says, don't just zone off. We'll be a laughingstock for the Sand Shinobi, which I highly doubt is the case because those ninjas are nothing compared to you guys, but that's just me. Now the 2 Sand Shinobi then called out to him and said, thank you for coming to the Land of Wind, we're counting on your support. And these 2 ninjas being Yodo and Araya, the members of Team Shinki. And Konohamaru pretty much says the feeling is mutual, let's get going. We then get this panel of someone saying the coordinates we heard about should be in that area with the column-shaped rocks. Mitsuki then says, Sensei, where did the 8th hear this information? Konohamaru then replied saying, I'm not sure, it sounded plausible, but to be honest, I'm half in doubt. Then we have Yodo walking up to Sarada saying, long time no see, your vibe has changed a bit, taking a liking to a guy. And of course Sarada's a bit shocked by this and says, that's not, but before she could finish, Yodo replied saying, I see. Doesn't matter much to me, but, and before she could finish, Konohamaru says, there they are, the Shinju. And that's when you see the Matsuri and Shinki Shinju standing in between the columns, and they seem to be staring at a dead frog. Matsuri then says it's a clue that will connect us to Boruto, and that's where the chapter ends. So it does seem like we're definitely gonna get Mitsuki or Sage Mitsuki versus Shinki at this point in time, which will be glorious, it's gonna be awesome. And of course Konohamaru is gonna fight Matsuri. Now I'm gonna make a prediction, and this is a big prediction and some people are gonna disagree, but I believe by the end of this fight, we're all going to agree that Konohamaru is now stronger than Gaara. And I know, this might sound crazy to some people, but I truly believe based on his feat so far in TBV, and the fact that this predator is Matsuri, the same person that destroyed Gaara, this likely means that he somewhat scales above him to match up to Matsuri. Now, I could be wrong, okay, that's fine, but we'll see. With that said, let me know your thoughts down below in the chapter itself. Do you think it was a good chapter? Do you think it was a bad chapter? Do you think it was a nothing chapter? Or do you think it needed a bit more something else to complete the package? I think it was awesome. I think it was good. We had some fun with the death of Philibert, the non-death, because Philibert is technically still alive. This is a different frog, likely named Phil. Okay, not Philibert, Phil. And we also have the resurgence of the fandom wars, which is always fun, okay? So that part is gonna be funny to see on Twitter, and I'm gonna enjoy myself. And hopefully you guys join me there, or you guys can join me on Discord. The link will be pinned down in the comments. By the way, if you guys missed it, I made a video explaining every single Rasengan in the Naruto Boruto universe. So if you guys wanna watch it, it will be linked at the end of this video. With that said guys, drop a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace!